Hello everybody and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody who has subscribed since my last video. Talking of which, it's been a while, it's been a month or so. Unfortunately, I haven't been feeling very well recently, so that coupled with the rather unpredictable weather led to a bit of a hiatus, I'm afraid. So anyway, I'm back, and what I thought I'd do today is to talk about my motorcycle journey, if you like, from when I started to where I am now, and go through all the different bikes that I had. So hopefully I'll be able to find some decent images on the interweb to put up so you can see exactly which bikes I had and the exact colours if I can find them. So a little bit of background really before I start going through the bikes themselves. When I joined the Air Force in 1979, my first posting was to RAF Cottesmore, which is actually in Rutland. And for those of you who don't know, that's the smallest county in England. Now, Cottesmore was a good base, surrounded by beautiful countryside. However, there were literally 2 buses a week into Oakham, which was a local town. And if you missed it on the way back, you had to get a taxi. It was that bad. So it soon became apparent that I needed wheels, or some kind of transport anyway. A friend of mine at the time had a bike, can't remember what it was now, but he suggested that perhaps I get one too. Now, it's not something I'd ever thought about until that moment in time. So I just thought, oh, what the hell, why not? So off I went into Oakham on the back of my mate's bike. And there was actually a car dealership that had a bike in. It was a Suzuki A100. I think it was on a V plate from what I can remember. And I bought the bike, learnt on the hoof, so to speak. Obviously there was no formal training then, so it was either you survived or you died. Anyway, I survived long enough to pass my test, which I took and passed first attempt, although there's a story behind that as well which we won't go into. And that bike took me all over the place. It gave me my freedom. It enabled me to go and see my girlfriend at the time, not rely on a grumpy dad to bring me back to base. And I went all over the place with it. It was great. So in terms of that bike, if I had to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10 for just overall utility really and fun, I'd probably give that one a 6, to be honest. I think it had a grand total of about 9 horsepower, so it wasn't the fastest beast, but nevertheless it did its job very well and very reliably. After I passed my test, I thought I'd go large, so I got Honda 250 Super Dream, lovingly known as a wet dream. I probably should have got the 400 really, but I think the 250 was all I could afford at the time. But again, that bike again took me all over the place. By that time I was seeing my girlfriend down in Bristol, who later became my wife. So I was traipsing down from Cottesmore down the Fossway, which is a very historic road in England, down to Bristol most weekends. There's a little bit of motorway involved. On the Fossway it struggled a bit up the hills, particularly with a headwind and when you're overtaking a caravan. And on the motorway it was a little bit dodgy, if I'm fair. But anyway, had that bike. I did crash it once, about 50-mile-an-hour crash. I saw it sliding down the road as I rolled over onto the curb. Luckily there wasn't too much damage because I had panniers on. And it wasn't long after that really that I decided that I'd get another bike. So I swapped the Super Dream. Oh sorry, Super Dream, right, rating wise, again for what it did for me to get me further afield, I'd probably give that a 6.5. It was very underpowered for what it was, but it was comfortable from what I can remember, and I could load it up reasonably well. So after the Super Dream I got a Kawasaki Z400. And I suppose looking back on that bike, I think it can be best described as a bit vanilla. It was okay, it did its job. It got me about. I got posted from Cottesmore down to RAF West Drayton in Middlesex to the London Air Traffic Control Centre, where I was an assistant air traffic controller, later to become a support controller when I got promoted. So on the trip down I loaded all my possessions from Cottesmore onto my bike. To be honest, God knows how I managed to fit it all on, to be honest. Put it this way, the front end was rather light. But anyway, it took me down to London. When I was there I got married, and then I used to use it to commute backwards and forwards from married quarters in RAF Uxbridge. So again, that bike did its job, nothing special to be honest. Started going a bit rusty as well, but it was okay. I'd probably give that one a 5.5. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. It wasn't long after that that I decided to get myself a shaft drive. It was the first one and only shaft drive that I've ever owned, and it was a Kawasaki GT550. I believe in the press at the time it got a lot of slating, but I was reading a past review of it last week actually, and the reviewer actually said that for it being a bit ordinary, it was a very good bike, and I'd probably concur with that. Obviously being shaft drive, there's no maintenance side of it was reduced, which was good, bearing in mind I didn't have a garage. The riding position was very good. The handlebars were a little bit higher than normal, and it was extremely comfortable. And I used to do a lot of riding on that one around Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire when I was off shifts during the week. I used to be into photography at that time, so I used to go all over the place on it, and that bike served me really well. When I eventually left the Air Force in 1989, moved back up to Leeds, we bought a house not far from where I grew up, and we had a car as well by that time, so piled everything into the car and I rode the bike up. The house that we had was a 2-bedroom mid-terrace, 1914 I think it was built. It didn't have a garage, just had a little backyard. So it wasn't long before I realised that the bike wasn't really liking being stuck outside in all weathers. So I got rid of it, and it wasn't until we moved house a couple of years later that I decided to get another bike, and I got a Honda VFR 750. I think it was one of the first iterations of the VFR, and that was a great bike. It was the first sort of sporty bike I suppose that I'd had, and yeah, I love that bike. In terms of the, I'll keep forgetting to rate, don't I? In terms of the Kawasaki, I'll probably give that one a 6.5 to 7. So yeah, the VFR is a good bike, very reliable. Again, I was reading a review of that as well, and they were saying it was probably one of the best ones of the VFRs, but I wouldn't know because I never rode any of the others. So I'm sure someone can tell me in the comments whether they think it was or not. So I kept that one for a couple of years, and I decided to swap it out for a Yamaha X-Up, the Vance & Hines version, which was a bright purple and yellow one. And that bike was the first real sports bike they actually had, and boy could that thing shift. Sounded great, and that took me off up into the Dales, Yorkshire Dales, and all over the place. So I really enjoyed that bike. And then one day I went to the bike shop, which of course is fatal, isn't it? And I saw CBR 1000F, which I quite fancied. So I chopped the Yamaha in for the CBR, which was probably a mistake in hindsight. I'd probably give the Yamaha a rating of about an 8.5. So I ended up with the CBR 1000F, which of course is quite a big sports tourer. And as I say, I don't really know why I bought it, because it wasn't really suited to what I was doing. Nearly all my riding was up in the Yorkshire Dales on the twisty country roads, and that just wasn't really suited for it, to be honest. Not that it was a bad bike. I think if I was doing a lot of motorway work, it would have been absolutely fine, but the fact is I wasn't. So it wasn't long before I sold that and ended up getting a 5-blade 900RR. Now that was some beast. Any of you who've ridden one of those will know. Had great fun on that bike. And I kept that for about 3.5 years, I think. Yeah, I think it must have been about 3.5, 4 years. 1981 or 82. Sorry, 91, 92. I decided to sell that. Again, happened to be going to the bike shop and I saw an Aprilia Mille, which I like the look of, so I traded the 5-blade in. I think I give the 5-blade a 9 out of 10, and I got the Mille. Now those of you who know about the Mille, it was the first iteration, and from what I understand it was a pretty much just a tuned down version of the race one, made road legal, and it was a bit of a beast. Put it this way, it was like, when you rode it, it was like trying to tame a wild dog. It was a handful, but again, really, really superb fun. And boy, was that quick. Not as quick as a 5-blade, but with it being a twin, the characteristics of it were completely different. I think I got about 143 off that. Could have gone on a lot more, but I bottled out. That was on a private road, of course. And yeah, that was a great bike. Then my son came along in 2021, sorry, 2001 rather, and as I'm sure everyone who's got kids knows, people who have had kids knows that time becomes a little bit more precious, and I found I was spending less and less time on the bike, and every time I opened the garage door I used to feel so guilty just looking at the bike. So it was with an extremely heavy heart that I sold that one to a mate of mine, and I pretty much sold all my gear and decided that was my biking days done. By that time I think I was sort of 48, something like that, 47, 48, 49. Every now and then I go on to MOT checker to see if the bike's still around, and it is. Last time I looked anyway, which is always nice to see someone's having some fun with it. So for the Aprilia I'd probably give that a 9.5. Probably a little bit more than the Fireblade, purely because of the twin cylinder engine. So there was me thinking my biking days were done, and then COVID came along, and I started watching YouTube, as I'm sure lots of other people did during those times when we were sat at home. I started watching bike videos. Fatal. And in the end I thought to myself, do you know something, I right fancy a bike again. Talked myself into it. So I had a look around and I thought, if I just get something like the Millie or the Fireblade again, I'll probably kill myself in a week. So I decided to get something smaller, and I decided to get a Triumph TT600. I think it was built in 1981-82. So it's quite an old bike. It didn't have many miles on the clock. And for those of you that don't know or haven't really heard of the Triumph TT600, it was Triumph's answer to the CBR 600 and the Yamaha offerings and Kawasaki offerings. But unfortunately they were a bit late to the party, and it didn't sell very well. And eventually I believe they ditched it and brought out the Daytona 675. Again, I could be wrong on that, so please correct me if I am. So I've got the TT600. It was quite large for a 600, but not massive, and I'm 6'2", so it was just big enough for me. A little bit cramped in the legs. My hip was going at the time as well, so it did get a little bit painful at times. But boy, that bike handled well. And I think, in all honesty, it was probably the best handling bike I've ever had. It was superb. It was balanced. You could stick it into the corner in pretty much any gear, and you know you're going to get out of it okay in one piece. It really was superb. So not long after that, probably about 2.5 years, I kind of grew out of it really. My hip was beginning to hurt quite a lot, so I swapped it for Triumph Tiger 1050, which was the first kind of adventure style bike that I've ever owned. That took a little bit of getting used to. It was on an 07 plate. It didn't have any modern technology apart from, in fact I don't think it even had ABS, to be honest. And yeah, it's the first bike I'd ever owned that was quite tall. But going back to the Triumph TT, I think I'd probably give that one an 8. So the Triumph Tiger, yeah, a little bit tall, obviously, with it being an adventure style bike. But the hardest thing I found to get used to was the fact that it was quite top heavy, because the centre of gravity was quite high, obviously, particularly with the full fuel tank. But anyway, what that bike did for me was to get me to places that I wouldn't normally go and that I'd never been to in the Yorkshire Dales, bearing in mind I'm born and bred in Yorkshire and on the doorstep to the Yorkshire Dales. Little country roads that you probably wouldn't want to go down on a sports bike, up over the tops, and that made me realise there was an awful lot more to the Yorkshire Dales than the main roads, and I'm sure anyone who's ridden in the Yorkshire Dales will concur with that. So I did a fair few thousand miles on that bike in the relatively short time that I had it. After about 18 months of owning it, I got diagnosed with prostate cancer and had the operation. I will do a separate video on that, by the way, not the operation but my story on that, because I think it's important that men of a certain age are aware of it and what they can do to help themselves. So yeah, I had a prostate operation, and after my treatment I had to go on the hormone therapy, and I found I'd lost an awful lot of strength because the hormones reduce your testosterone levels, and I was never a particularly strong person anyway, and I just thought to myself, if I keep riding this bike I'm going to drop it. So it was very reluctantly that I decided to get rid of it, and I've been looking on YouTube and there've been an awful lot of videos singing the praises of the new BSA Gold Star 650 single, and the more I watch these videos, the more I thought I really fancy that bike. So I swapped the Triumph for the Gold Star, which I'm riding now. Now I've done just under 5,000 miles on it. I've had it almost exactly 1 year. Today's October the 2nd 2025, and I got it on October the 4th 2024. Despite a few hiccups along the way, the bike is running fantastically well. It gets me everywhere I want to go. It's great on motorways, it's great on the little twisties, it's great on the A roads like I'm on now, and it's got a great amount of power, great torque. The power itself is only 45 brake horsepower, but the way it's delivered through the 650 Rotax engine is excellent. So that's the bike I'm riding at the moment. If and when I'll change, I don't know. I'm sure I will at some point. So in terms of the Gold Star, the Triumph, by the way, I'd probably give an 8.5 to, mainly for its utility, and the riding position is very good. With regards to the Gold Star, I know it's always very easy to think the bike that you own is better than any of the other bikes that you've owned, but I truly think, as an all-rounder and for the fun factor, and I talk about sensible fun, and its utility, I would probably give it to the Gold Star, which I know I've owned some fantastic bikes along the way, but I really do think this Gold Star, for me, suits me down to the ground. So if you've owned any of the bikes that I've owned, please put a note in the comments and let me know what your thoughts are. The Gold Star I'd probably give a 9.5. Well, 9 to 9.5, so it's probably just a little bit better than the others on 9. Yeah, so please leave a comment below. Please like and share the video, and if you haven't subscribed, I'd be so grateful if you could. I'm a relatively new channel. And every subscription helps. So with that, I shall wish you a very good day until the next one, and I shall see you later. Thanks for watching.